Woof, woof. Woof, woof, woof. Today, I'd like to welcome you all back to another episode of the Ballymaloe Festival of Food podcast, where we're giving a flavour of the people and the conversations that will be part of this year's festival. Today, we're getting into something that really sits at the heart of Ballymaloe, which is food as a way of understanding the world around us. Because food isn't just what we eat, it's of course culture, it's history, it's identity, and it's often the first way we connect with a place.
Yeah, and I think it's something we all recognise. You can arrive somewhere new and it might feel unfamiliar, but then you sit down to eat and suddenly there's a way in, there's a story there.
Exactly. And today's guest is someone who has really built her career around exploring those stories through food. We're joined by Felicity Cloake and woof woof, I don't know if her dog's in the background.
Mine is.
Yours is Bree. Felicity is an award-winning food writer and a journalist known for her work with The Guardian and her How to Cook the Perfect ... series, where she tests and breaks down recipes to find the very best version.
She's also written several food travel books, and her latest, Peach Street to Lobster Lane, sees her cycling across America in search of what American food really is, or whether it even exists as a single cuisine at all.
And alongside that, Felicity has also moved into fiction with her new novel, The Underdog, set in the world of food, which I hope that we'll get to chat about as well.
I hope so.
Oh, I loved it. Anyway, Felicity will also be joining us in the Ballymaloe Festival of Food this year, so this is a really nice chance to get a sense of her work and the kinds of conversation that she will bring to the festival.
Yay! We're so delighted that you could join us, Felicity. Thank you so much for coming on board the Ballymaloe Festival of Food podcast. How are you doing?
I am very well, thank you. I'm so delighted to be here. I apologise, the dog is not here at the moment, but don't worry, he will get out of bed quite soon and surely make himself known. So enjoy the peace.
And I built Wilf up there. What's your dog's name, Bree?
And Ali is also, although I've just let her out, but she'll be back in a minute barking at the door. She doesn't normally come to work with me, but she was going to be home by herself all day today, and I couldn't. She's here causing mischief.
Bree was telling me just before we started, she's been on holidays for a couple of days, right? And you came in early to the office, and instead of prepping, well, I think this was actually prep for the podcast, you started reading Felicity's book and couldn't stop.
I actually, over the weekend that I was away, I read The Underdog. I was very kindly sent a pre-release copy, and I couldn't put it down. I just loved it. I was so invested in the characters. I absolutely loved it. And then I came in this morning and you sent the PDF of the your next one, Cycling Through America.
Oh, thank you. You've really gone above and beyond. I'm impressed.
Yeah. Well, I was so hooked. I was like, right, nothing else is getting done. Oh, if I could curl up on the couch for the rest of the day with a pot of tea and just read it, I just loved it. Anyway.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sending in that copy of the book, because I started reading it over the weekend too. I didn't quite finish it, but I just loved the way that you kind of bring food and travel and how food kind of feels like this way of understanding a place. Why do you think that works so well as a lens and a framework for writing?
I think there's a couple of reasons. The first is the obvious cliche, because it's true, is that food is one of the very few things that one can talk about with strangers that connects us all. So you don't have to speak the same language as someone to connect over food. And I found actually less so in this latest book, because one of the great things about Americans is that they love to chat. So you don't really need an in with them. But when I was cycling around France, for example, the French, they're quite reserved people, I would say. And so often they'd be thinking, who is this mad British woman on a bike, the whole Mad Dogs and Englishmen thing. But then you'd ask them about what the local specialities were, or where you should, where I should go to get the Great Cassoulet. And suddenly they would open up and they'd think, oh, she sounds like a heathen. Her accent is terrible, but, she appreciates the finer things in life. And then they would there was a point of connection there, even though I was a sweaty, Anglo-Saxon in Lycra and they were a refined Parisian. There was that point of connection. So that's the first thing. And secondly, it's never just about food. Actually, that in America, I found that more than anywhere else. I think I was telling this light-hearted story. We tend to think of American food as quite sort of cartoonish and not serious, as perhaps the same way as, say, like Indian food or French food. But actually, there's always such a complex backstory to things like, for example, fried chicken. You can't really write about fried chicken without going into slavery, or you can't write about popcorn without talking about Native American culture and how that's been erased. So there was actually, I found myself going into some quite dark places, but always with food, it's more than just about what you're eating. And it's usually a quite accessible and colourful way into to talk about some other themes and some things that are important to a place. So yeah, I think it's the perfect way, and you get to eat loads of great stuff. So it's ideal.
Yeah, that's so gorgeous. Like, and that idea of like American cuisine, like, is this an idea that even exists? Like, could you put your finger on what American cuisine is?
I think so. It's less easy to define than longer established cuisines. I think that most people would have an agreement on what made up the classics of Italian cuisine, for example. But people said to me, including my own publisher, said, there's no such thing as American food. It's all just imports from other places. Which, leaving aside the whole question of, the fact that there were lots of people in the States before it was the United States, is just not true. If you go and have a pizza in Chicago, that is not a pizza that would be recognised in Naples. In fact, the Neapolitans would hold up their hands in horror. But everything is changed. All foods are imports to some extent. There would be no Italian cuisine as we know it without tomatoes from the New World, for example, or Indian cuisine without chilies from the New World. So it's all, lots of imports and ideas and sort of cross-pollination, which is one of the things that makes food so exciting. But everything's been changed by this prism of the abundance in America for a start. So there's often a lot more meat and dairy and expensive ingredients than there would be in the original dish back home. But also, again, the influence of other cuisines, because you're not living in a little village in Calabria. You're living with Poles, you're living with Irish, you're living with Scottish. You've got all of these different influences. And so they take on some of that. And some of the most exciting and unexpected foods that I had there were these fusions, but not in a sort of very artificial way. For example, when I was in Texas, I went to a restaurant run by a Texan woman who had grown up in San Antonio, which is such a lovely city, so unexpected to me. I just thought it was all going to be like Dallas, Dallas opening credits with the skyscrapers and JR. But San Antonio, and she had a restaurant where she served Taiwanese food because her mother was Taiwanese, but with a Tex-Mex slant because that was the food that she'd grown up with. And she would describe herself as Texan first, American second, Taiwanese third. And so you had things like breakfast tacos, which are huge in Texas and in the Southwest. But instead of doing them in tortillas, she would have them in like little Chinese dumpling wrappers. And so it was just Mexican chorizo and, American cheese and scrambled eggs in these little dumplings with a avocado crema dipping sauce. I cannot tell you how good they were. And there were always things like this, these sort of fusion foods, but very natural, very authentic, sort of cross-pollination, which made it the most exciting place to eat that I think I've ever been. And I did not expect that. I thought it was going to be lots of hamburgers and pizzas and etc., the greatest hits, but I found so much richness there.
Yeah. And when you start sort of thinking about American food, you hear a lot about Southern food, or you hear about the sort of clam chowder or lobster rolls. But actually it's such a huge country that every area has to have its own food identity. We just don't see it or realize it, or it's not, it's all about the hamburger.
And that was something, I can't say it surprised me because obviously I thought I was aware of how big America is. But then when I was there, I just thought, this is mad. How can somewhere like, Southern California be in the same country as Northern Maine, which is basically looks like Canada and has bears and etc. It's extraordinary. And people kept saying to me, because I was there in the run up to the presidential election in 2024, people kept saying to me, this country is too big to hold together. It's going to splinter. And that sounds like hyperbole, but when you're there, you sort of get it, that it's like, having the entire of Europe in one voting bloc. It just seems mad.
Yeah.
I was there just before the first 2016 when Trump first got in. And you can see it then, like we went from LA to Boston and then Maine and all around. And it was such a different, it was like different countries. Every time you move into a different sort of state, it's a different country, really.
For me, I haven't explored America at all. I've been to New York. I mean, that's a slice of America, but I can't imagine what it must be like to be out in that wild open or the deep south and like all these incredible places that I'd actually love to go to. But do you know what I love about your story is the fact that you did it by bike, you mad woman. Like, I am just like completely floored by that idea. Like such a vast space on such a slow mode of transport. But I also love it because I feel that like when you travel by bike, you're really slowing everything down and you take things in and it just becomes a different experience. How did you find traveling by bike, I suppose, formed your journey? And like, do you think you would have found the same stories if you had gone, say, on the interstate bus?
And what gave you the idea? Sorry, what gave you the idea also to, even with the first book, to do these sort of travel books on bike?
Yeah.
That's a very long question now.
Well, we've got lots of bike related questions here.
I love talking about my bike. I love him. So I got the idea because when would it have been? 2017, a friend of mine decided that she was going to move back to her family farm in the south of France and write a cookbook, actually. And for some reason, I mean, she's the one to blame for all of this. She decided that she was going to cycle down there. Obviously, all of her stuff went by, lorry, but she decided, having not owned a bike in London ever, to cycle there. I don't know to this day what got into her. And she just put together this sort of ragtag group of women, none of whom knew each other previously, people she'd worked with, friends from university, and, school friends. And we just went and we cycled from Brittany right down to the Mediterranean coast. And it was the most amazing trip. We were just camping. We were sort of eating picnics. It wasn't flash in any way, but there's so much time to think on a bike. And I was thinking during these, 2.5 weeks of cycling, how wonderful it was to slow down and see France, a country that I felt I knew really well because we always went on holiday there when I was a child, from a completely different lens. And suddenly you're seeing it's so slow that you can see things like you get up in the morning and all the roofs are slate and people are drinking beer and eating butter. And by the time you stop in the evening, it's terracotta roofs and there's, people are having wine. And it's just suddenly you're moving from culture, but so slowly you can notice it. And if you saw something interesting, you just thought, oh, let's stop. Let's have a look at that. There was no rush to it. And I thought, I wonder if there's a book in this. And to her credit, my agent went, oh, this sounds a great idea. And that's how the first book was born, that was going around France in a more sort of complete way, talking to people about food. But America was more, so then I did one that was around the UK and Northern Ireland, looking at breakfast, and that was quite simple because that's also not a bad place to travel, although I would say the weather was less good than France. But America, people really gave them pause for thought. Number one, because, as I was saying, people don't think America has a food culture, so they were like, why would you bother? But number two, the idea of cycling, it's not somewhere that's really known as a place that people cycle. It's like a real big truck SUV place. And even a friend of a friend who I was going to stay with in LA, in Beverly Hills, actually, just to show off a little bit. He's not my friend, he's the friend of my friend's parents. And he wrote to me several urgent emails saying, you must not cycle, it's very dangerous. And he'd send me little clippings from the local newspaper about people that had died on the Pacific Coast Highway. And he was obsessed by the fact it was dangerous. And it really did sort of put the wind up me a bit. And I thought, am I mad here? But when I got there, I realised that it's the same as anywhere, as long as you're sensible. I found I had more close calls in London cycling than I had in the States. And I had a few hairy moments. But in general, because it's such a huge country, the roads tend to be quite quiet because I wasn't on the interstates, of course. I was on the local roads. So they've got these massive roads with about 3 farm vehicles an hour and me. But it was a great way for people to start conversations with me because they did think that I was totally mad. They'd think I was a pizza delivery person or whatever. And so they'd just want to stop, check I was all right, warn me about crime. Everyone was obsessed by crime. I didn't have a single thing stolen. I never felt unsafe, really, apart from the wildlife, which was my own naivety. But it really did open up conversations, and I got to see so many things that there's no way I would have seen from a motor vehicle or flying. Because, again, things, the world opens up to you with cycling in a way that it just couldn't. Actually, interestingly, at the same time, I was listening to the Bill Bryson book where he goes across the States, I think his first book, which I remember loving when it came out in the 1990s, I think. And I was really struck listening to it. It's still incredibly funny, interesting, but he doesn't talk to anyone because he gets in his car and then he stays in a motel, and he makes a joke of that, being this grumpy middle-aged man. But I wanted to chat to people, and you cannot avoid it when you're on a bike in America. Everyone wants to ask what you're up to. And also, I could cycle through the sketchiest parts of LA or Chicago, and I never felt unsafe because people just assumed if you're not in a car, you've got no cash. So it was perfect.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Is there no cycling culture at all in America?
There is, on the Pacific Coast Highway, which was one of the most beautiful cycle routes in the world, I would say. I definitely fell foul of some of those. I assume you had them in Ireland too, the Lycra louts, the men and got all of the gear. And I stopped to take a photograph with my big panniers and etc. Clearly didn't look very professional, and they got very cross with me. So there's a bit of that with that kind of, quite aggressive sports cycling. But there is a big bike packing culture because they're quite a sort of outdoorsy nation, or there's a bit of them that is quite into that sense of wildness and adventure. So you can do things like cycle just across the States in one go, which I would love to do. So I did meet people, but it wasn't really until I got to the East Coast, where things were a little bit closer together, that I met other cycle tourists. In general, it was just me and my bike.
And was there a moment on the trip when something you ate completely changed your thought about that place, or you sort of arrived and had a preconception and then you ate something and that preconception was blown into the weeds?
Oh, that is a very good question.
Hijacked it from Jolene, I'll be honest.
Oh, no, it's a great question. I'm trying to desperately think of one example of that.
And it might not have happened at all. Like, you could have easily, arrived somewhere and was expecting great food and you just got great food, or you arrived somewhere and expected horrible food and that was horrible food,
I think that's actually quite funny because there's lots of examples of things that, for example, as I was saying in Texas, I was thinking it was all going to be steaks, and actually it was like lots of like different fusion things. And I was in the Gulf, actually on the Gulf Coast, and they have those big crawfish boils, which are very famous and, a real community thing. But they had a lot of Vietnamese come and settle there in the 1970s for, obvious geopolitical reasons. And they turned that into, even though there's no history of crawfish eating in Vietnam, it's not a thing, but they turned those into like a social thing for the Vietnamese community as well. And I loved stuff like that, like new waves of immigrants taking things for their own. But the first thing I thought of when you asked me that was the Amish people in the Midwest, which I sort of am fascinated by this idea of, these people who, ride around on little horse buggies and wear something that looks like they're out of a 19th century Dutch painting and etc., existing in this world of SUVs and McDonald's, etc. But what I hadn't realised was that so I went to a store, an Amish store, because it was the only store for miles around. I was on these gravel roads, and it was actually really lovely to cycle in Amish country because for the first and only time, people are going at your pace. And, you'd raise your hand at people in their little buggies, and the kids ride bikes, which is nice. Again, I saw bikes. You saw a washing line. I didn't see anyone with their washing out in the States because they've all got tumble dryers. There were gardens that were being cultivated. It just felt much more on a human scale and European than a lot of the States. But I went into a store and I just wanted like a cold drink and maybe an ice cream or something because it was so hot at that point. And I realised they only sell things for families of 20. There was nothing. There were just huge packs of things. There was nothing. And I had to ask the girl, there was kind of quite a young girl behind the counter because they've got a real work ethic. And I asked her and she had this discussion in Pennsylvania Dutch, which is the language that they speak, which I think is a bit like Old German, with her friend. And then they said, oh, there's some birch beer in that cabinet. So I had birch beer, which was interesting, and sat there. But then a girl drove up in an SUV to have her gas canisters refilled. And she was just wearing a crop top and denim shorts. And the world that, you know, this young boy that was helping her was in like a straw hat and braces and etc. and a shirt. So I was like, these two worlds colliding, I did not expect. But then I was cycling past a Walmart later and there were buggy hitch points because the Amish also use Walmart and they go to McDonald's because the idea is not that, you know, you shun modern technology in your day-to-day life, but if someone else is going to make it a bit easier for you in that sense, then you're allowed to do that. So they will also, you know, go to McDonald's with, you know, their 15 kids occasionally as a treat. Yeah. And I found that really fascinating. I imagine they were just very shut off from modern American culture, but they're not. They really pick and choose. So I found that really fascinating. And they make great pies, the Amish. They're, you know, anywhere that I went to a farmer's market in the Midwest, there would be Amish stalls, often staffed by children, with incredible produce and unpasteurized butter and pies and etc. So that was really interesting to me.
Oh. Yeah, pies was a theme of the book, was it? Like croissants in France and breakfast. And I mean, is this going to be giving away the book to say, where was your favourite pie? You don't have to answer.
No. I mean, I chose pies just because they felt very all-American, obviously as American as apple pie, but also because there was so much regional variation there, because there was no one thing. I didn't really want to eat a hamburger every time I saw a hamburger. I thought that might be bad from a health point of view. But pies, I thought there's going to be some fruit involved. It's, you know, slightly healthy. But I think the best pie that I had, actually, I had a really amazing one in New York. A bit like the best croissants I had, sadly, were in Paris. I think that the competition for pies, even though New York isn't really a pie town, pie is more of a southern thing. I had an amazing, like a blueberry pie with a kind of lavender streusel topping on it, which kind of a bit Germanic, and I think it was blueberries were in season at that point. It was just so delicious, like so many different like textures and flavors in there. Yeah, that was my favorite. But almost all the pies I ate were great. There were some of the Midwestern ones, the sugar pies they call them, were quite difficult to get through an entire slice. But yeah, I mean, their pies, they sound very sweet, but also they always have a savoury, flaky pastry, so it's quite nice. It's not too much. It's not like here, I think we often do a sugary pastry and a sugary filling, and they are too much, whereas the States knows that, you know, a nice salty pastry is perfect with a sweet filling.
Oh, that's lovely, that little pie mission. You know, I think it's a really nice way to navigate the country, and it like kind of brings in that regional identity. That's amazing. Actually, talking about identity and like those deeper stories, do you think that we underestimate how much food actually carries our history and even the political side of things, especially in America?
Definitely. And again, people were very skeptical about American food as a topic and how much I could write. But also, I find it interesting with what I call serious travel writers. Often they're not that interested in food. And I love the late Dervla Murphy. She was my hero. I just think she's fantastic, such an inspiration.
Amazing.
I just want to know more about what she eats. And she writes about it a little bit, but there's not enough. It's just, I think, I once bought a whole sack of Hunter dried apricots from the internet because I'd been reading about, I think, when she was in Baltistan and how she gorged herself on these apricots. And I thought, she made them sound so honeyed and delicious that I thought I've got to find some of these. And they are, in fact, honeyed and delicious, although it turns out you can't eat too many dried apricots or they have a slightly weird effect on you. But I want more, because not because I'm greedy and I want to read about other people eating when I'm not eating myself, but because they tell the story. And I think that people are guilty of just assuming that food is very light. But we'll see, at the moment, looking at the geopolitical situation, so many people are going hungry because of various things that are happening in the world. And you just think, and then you see these lovely, for example, like Eid celebrations in Gaza, and you think these things, they had the really power to connect us and to think, oh, you're seeing these people on the other side of the world as human. And I think we really underestimate the power of food in that way, and what it tells us about a culture.
Yeah, and is this something, like, I suppose as a writer you're looking for this angle, is this something you're kind of like actively looking for now as you travel, that connection with food and politics and identity, or is this something that just kind of reveals itself naturally?
I think I usually start with the food, just because the the point of my travel writing is generally to find out more about food culture, and to eat delicious things or not so delicious things, and explore that. But you can't help finding that there's always a deeper story. And when I got back, having done my trip, I spent a lot of time in the British Library, sort of doing the research and making sure that I was doing justice to these things and wasn't being frivolous, because, as I said, there's often a very complex backstory there. And I learnt so much. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say that it never struck me that, obviously, I knew that there were people in America before the colonists arrived, but it never struck me that actually, there was a food culture there, and there was lots of different nations and how that worked and where they all went. And I knew so little about that. And then I was in California, and I went to a museum in LA, a really fantastic Hispanic culture museum. And they were talking about how California was part of Mexico, was part of the Spanish Empire, and then part of Mexico before it was part of the US. And I thought, I didn't know that. And the same with Texas. It really puts into perspective these things that you maybe see online with people complaining about people speaking Spanish, and how that's threatening their American identity. And I'm thinking, hang on a minute, how can you say that? It's so much more nuanced than we give it credit for. So I thought I was there to write about sort of, Californian Mexican food, but I found out a lot more. So yes, there's always something more.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you spent much time in Ireland?
Well, not as much time as I would like, because I always eat so well when I'm in Ireland. Yes, I'm one of those people that suddenly rush to rediscover their Irish identity after 2016. So I did get myself a passport, etc., and suddenly felt a bit more Irish. And actually, I did a recipe for perfect Irish stew in The Guardian a few years ago, and I was terrified because Irish Radio RTE asked me to go on and defend it on there, and I was absolutely terrified. And they said they were very fair to me, and they said that I had done a good job, and I'd done it justice, which was a great relief to me.
Sounds, lads.
What is your perfect Irish stew, if you don't mind me asking?
Sorry?
What do you think does make the perfect Irish stew?
Oh, well, now you're asking me to. I'm trying to remember now, but I
She's
think
digging through the archives of her brain there now,
yes.
Bree.
Rolling it back, because I never get to eat anything twice, because I'm always on to the next recipe. But I always think keeping it simple with things like that is often the way, and it's not saying that a dish can't evolve. And if you want to put, things like garlic in and wine in, then, you should feel free to do so. But I love the simplicity of allowing the flavors of the meat, and, preferably a slightly older sheep. I'd always try and go for a hogget rather than a lamb, but, getting some real lamby flavor in there, and getting the really floury potatoes so they kind of dissolve into the gravy as well. So yeah, keeping it very simple would be my tip, and appeared to find favor. So but I was in Cork last year at the Butter Museum, which I have visited twice. I may be the only person to have visited twice. I loved it so much that I pitched it to Radio 4 here in the UK as a whole programme about butter. And we went around the butter museum and they had me making butter with one of their antique churns, which was really hard work. And then we went around the English market and it was just... I just love it. I just the quality of the produce and the enthusiasm for doing things really well always strikes me. It's just extraordinary. And I actually, because I'm a butter fanatic, I did actually bring some butter back and only belatedly realised that you're not supposed to be transporting dairy produce across European boundaries at the moment. I think it's because of foot and mouth, I think. But then I don't think Ireland has foot and mouth and neither does the UK. So I kind of retrospectively absolved myself. But I was just like, you can't go to Ireland and not bring back some butter. It is the best in the world. So yes, I'm a big fan of Irish produce and I'm looking forward to eating my fill of it when I come over in May.
I love butter too, by the way. Who doesn't love butter? As you were talking there about your column, and actually just to explain to listeners about your column. So what you do is you take a recipe or a concept like the Irish stew and you look at so many different ways of doing it and then you come up with this is the perfect way to do it. Is that a good way of understanding it or explaining it?
Yeah, so it's sort of, to take the Irish stew as an example, I will usually try and find 5 recipes that have some point of difference. And I will try and find recipes that aren't just, some random, I don't know, American chef or whatever doing it for the sake of it, but someone that I feel really understands a dish or an amendment that kind of seems to make sense and be interesting. And sometimes these days I also try and, wouldn't do it with Irish stew, but, a vegan version or something, just so people know that that's also available and what I think about it. And so I will test them all. So I'll test the 5 recipes and then I will try and get people round to tell me what they think of them. But it's not a democracy, so my opinion, unfortunately, does carry more weight. And then I sort of cherry pick the best bits, so someone might use a cut of lamb that I think works better in terms of flavour, but someone else might do something better with the potatoes. And so I'll just steal like a magpie all the best bits from the recipes I've tried and put them together into my perfect recipe, with the caveat that actually then, because I've got this great preamble, which, goes almost unedited onto the Guardian's website, you can see what I've tried. So if you happen to think that actually, Darina's Irish stew sounds much better than mine, then we'll try and put a link to that recipe if it's available online or which book it's available in. So it's my perfect version, but it's giving you lots of options. You might think, actually, I really dislike whatever, thyme or whatever. I'm going to swap that for a herb that someone else has used. So it's just sort of laying it out. It's a bit like one of those manuals that you get when you buy something from IKEA, and it's like all the different constituent parts, and then it tells you how to put those together into what I like. But you could also go, oh, I could use those in a slightly different way. Yeah. So yeah, it's kind of like a field guide to classic recipes.
I love it. And with testing so many recipes now over the years, do you think ingredients or methods actually matter more at the end of the day?
Oh, that's a great question. I've never been asked that before. I think probably ingredients, but I always find it interesting with a cuisine that I'm less familiar with. So, for example, a lot of the East Asian cuisines, you realise when you look at a dish that you have no idea of how it hangs together. For most sort of European-based cuisines, I can look at it and I kind of know how it's going to work. But for example, with a lot of Indian cooking, you don't brown the meat first because that's not the idea to build up that meaty flavour. And everything in me is saying, oh, just give it a little sear in the pan, just bring out some of those lovely caramelised flavours. But you can't do it, and the dishes are better for it. They're like a cleaner flavour, but it's just about really thinking about why someone does something. But I think the ingredients always have to be key, don't they? Because especially with simpler dishes, you don't want to get too fancy with them. So yeah, ingredients would always be my number one.
Yeah, and tell me, going right back, how did you end up in this career that you've had with The Perfect and the food? Because you were in university in the university paper, but then how did that move on to sort of specialising in food and what you do?
I mean, university paper is a very kind way to put editing the college magazine, which which was a very silly sort of photo. We used to take it and get it printed out at a print shop and staple it together. It was, very naughty.
So it should be, though.
Yeah, no, it was really great fun, and I mourn things like that. But I just always loved writing, so that was what I knew I wanted to do. But food was something that I've always been really greedy, and so I was drawn to that. But there are a number of things I was interested in. But when I was looking for a job in sort of the mid-noughties, food was suddenly having a real moment. Certainly in the UK, there was an explosion of magazines about food and, colour supplements about food in the newspapers and websites about food. And so that was an easy or slightly easier place. It was still quite competitive to get a job and work my way up. And I thought that food writing was just all about recipes, whereas suddenly I realised, being in there, that there were so many features and stories you could tell, and it fed into my other interests, like travel and history and literature, in the sense that a lot of the best food writers are just beautiful to read, like someone like Diana Henry. Just reading her words it is enough. You don't even have to make the recipe, even though it will be delicious. To read Diana on something like Frida Mare or even Irish stew is just so transporting. And I thought, this is where I want to be. I don't want to move and do something else. So yeah, I ended up here by accident, but I don't see myself, even having moved into fiction now as well. That's very much food based. Someone said to me always, is your next novel going to be food as well? I thought, why would it not be food? It's such a rich theme. And there's so much to explore. And who doesn't love reading about food, really?
Yeah. No, exactly.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
I have a question.
Actually, that just leads on to the Underdog, which
Yes.
I've just finished. So this is your first work of non-fiction. I always get that mixed up. And how did you come up with the idea for it? I mean, I have to say, I absolutely loved it. I read it in 2 days and couldn't put it down. I found myself so invested in Katie's life and what she did next.
Yes.
And the
Actually
boy
got
and the dog and everything else.
So again, accident. So during lockdown, I have a dog who is asleep next to me on the sofa now in the sun, but I did lockdown on my own with this dog, which actually was fine because I just ate lots of delicious food and read lots of books and carried on working, and actually it was fine. Did some volunteering, met loads of people in the local area. I'm not someone that had a tough lockdown. But I met this guy through a website called Borrow My Doggy, who was going to take Wilf. And I don't even know why. I think I just thought Wilf was maybe a bit bored hanging around with me all day. Wilf is the dog. And so I met this Finnish guy who would take Wilf like for a day a week, and they'd go on little adventures together, or, when the pubs reopened, they'd go to the pub. Wilf absolutely loved him. But he was talking to me and he was so friendly, and I was thinking, I don't think that you have romantic intentions towards me, but you're just so friendly that I was like, and
Where's the catch?
Yeah. I was like, you're great. And he didn't, but it got me thinking. I imagine if someone did use one of those websites, the dog borrowing sites, as a kind of dating app. That idea, I remember actually cycling back across London with the dog in my bicycle basket, and it just popped into my head, fully formed, like, imagine that as an idea, wouldn't that be interesting? And so I kind of got back and I thought, oh, is this a thing? And I spoke to some friends about it. During lockdown, I had a really intense relationship with some of my friends who also didn't have kids, and like we just spent a lot of time talking to each other, like hundreds of messages a day. And they were like, oh, yeah, you should write that. And so I thought, oh, God, this is actually a thing. So I said to my agent, what do you think? And she went, oh, probably you shouldn't try fiction, but give it a go. Write me a chapter. And so I wrote a chapter and I had so much fun writing it. I just thought, even if this goes nowhere, I've really enjoyed doing this. I haven't written fiction as an adult at all. And then she said, oh, I really like it, but now you have to write the entire book. So suddenly, having just had this one idea of like using a dog borrowing site as a dating app, I had to think of a whole plot and etc. around it. But I had the most fun. It's just, it felt like being a child again. And I don't know if either of you maybe were less nerdy children than me, but I just used to write really long, rambling stories when I was a kid, when I wasn't reading. And it just felt like that again, just making up a daydream, but writing it down. So yes,
there's so much beauty in the creative process that you're describing there. It's actually like just rekindling the joy for your craft.
Yeah,
exactly, and not having to just the thrill of being able to make people do what you want. When you're writing non-fiction, you have to go with what actually happened and what people actually said to you. And it would be lovely to make up someone for my travel things that said exactly the point I wanted to make and that I've met on the road. But I'm far too law-abiding. I think someone will find out that person isn't real. There'll be someone that met me at the time that said that's not how it happened. And so I would never do that. Whereas here, I could really make people do what I wanted. It was wonderful.
Yeah.
Did I spot on your Instagram that you're actually doing writing retreats as well, and you're coaching writing, or what's going on there?
Yeah, so I do a little bit. I used to do at The Guardian, they used to do masterclasses on food writing because it's such a popular area. And I think even though I really believe that, as with everyone can cook, everyone can write, it's just a question of practice. I think for confidence wise, it's useful to have a few it's useful to have that confirmed and a few pointers. And also people want to know the process, because it can be quite opaque if you're not in the media to know how you go about, say, pitching a cookbook or an article or whatever. And so I used to do those. And then, I am actually teaching one next weekend in London, which should be fun, getting back into it. But yeah, I did one last year in Umbria, which was amazing. It was sort of a week with 3 of us food and memoir writers, and such a great group of people, just fantastic. So interesting from the west coast of the States, from Singapore, from the UK, just really interesting group of, storytellers. And I'm always just blown away by the richness of other people's experiences. And you can see immediately when someone starts telling you a story, you think, that is going to make a great piece. That is going to make a great book. And they're often quite hesitant about it because your own story you just dismiss, and you can be, you think, oh, there's nothing interesting about me, or, my grandmother's cooking. She was just a crofter on the west coast of Scotland. And I was like, stop. I want to hear all about your grandmother and, her mother having been in service and etc. I want all of this, the story. I can see it now. So I love doing it, and I always come back feeling enthused again for what I do, and just like, it's a really nice, it's a nice boost for me, I think, as well.
Yeah, it's so inspirational being around other creatives. I work as a photographer, and when I am in the presence of any other artist, I just actually feel elevated and inspired, and I want to do more. And then it's just so different to kind of like working away on your own and being like, yes, oh my God, what's this all about?
Yeah, exactly. It's nice to be reminded why you do it sometimes.
You do need to be reminded.
Away at midnight, yes.
And for somebody maybe who was at the very start of a journey or a career in food writing, would you have some advice for them?
I think the top piece would be have the confidence to just start writing, because people often think, as I said, they don't trust in the value of their ideas and their experience, and they think that they have to write something that is like other things that they've read. Whereas actually the thing that makes, your recipe for, say, Irish stew, or your story about your childhood interesting, is the fact that it's unique, it's yours. No one else can tell that story. And so having that confidence, and then just getting started, and not umming and ahhing about the perfect way to start the piece or the book or whatever. I mean, I'm very much of the just plunge right in with the blank document and start writing, because you go back at the end. There's so much changes between the first draft and the thing that you actually publish. Don't worry about that, or you could be stuck for ages. And then lastly, never be afraid to leave something and go out for a walk or put the washing out. I do my best thinking when I'm not sitting at my laptop, and it's quite often if I go out for a dog walk or go swimming or whatever, do something that is manual and, take out my earphones and just think, that's when the idea comes to me. So, don't be afraid, anything where you're thinking about the work is work. You don't need to be sitting at your laptop to do it.
I'm going to write that one down. Yeah. Anywhere where you're thinking about the work is work. Is that what you said?
Yeah, and sometimes you don't, it just pops into your head. You don't realise you're thinking about it. And you just, honestly, it's giving that uncluttered space. And it's one of the reasons that I think I've tried to get, this is one of my hobby horses, so you might want to cut this out, but everyone walking around listening to things all the time, I think, is the enemy of creativity, because you need that silence in your head. I mean, I say silence, I live in central London, but just for the ideas to percolate and, things pop up in unexpected places. They're like sort of bubbles of creativity that suddenly rise to the surface. If you don't give them room, if you never quiet your brain, where are they going to come from? So yes, just, go out for a walk and think is my top tip.
Oh, I love it. I want to be friends with you, Felicity.
Well, I want to be you.
Great, let's be friends.
I want to be your neighbour getting invites to the taste tests.
I wish central London wasn't so far from Cork.
That's true.
But anyway, the good news is that you will be in Cork very soon for the Ballymaloe Festival of Food. I actually can't wait for that. It's only a few weeks away.
Oh, I'm so excited. And I'm coming by bus and train, so I'm excited about that as well. I'm probably going to write something about that journey because I'm not flying this year, my New Year's resolution. So I'm really excited. Like, how much more romantic, and I've been on that ferry before, so I'm well aware that romantic is not the first word that is going to be used for it. But
term.
Very loose term, especially if it's rough, which hopefully it won't be in May. But just like that process of starting at London Euston with all of its diesel fumes and ending up, in the south of Ireland, just that, the fresh air, the sea breeze. I'm excited.
Yeah. If these protests keep going, it's okay. There won't be any diesel air anywhere.
You'll have to bring the bike as well to get here.
That is, maybe I need to look into getting a bike.
Maybe a camel.
Yes.
No, don't bring a camel. Different culture. So I think that's probably all we can possibly stuff into this fantastic conversation. I've just really, really enjoyed chatting to you for the last 45 minutes. Wow.
You're amazing.
Me too.
Great to meet you in person and see you on stage at the festival.
I'm excited.
Yeah. What are you going to actually be doing at the Festival of Food?
I think that I'd just be sort of talking about my work and hopefully I always like these things to be quite interactive. So I'm hoping that there's going to be lots of interesting audience questions and chit chat about food writing and recipes and travel, and maybe people can give me some great recommendations about where I should be eating locally so I can come back, because I've heard there's some great cycling around you and some lovely greenways and stuff. So I want to come back with my bike and actually do some of that. So I'm hoping it's going to be sort of more a discussion.
I see a new book. I can see a new book already.
Yes.
We can lend you a bike while you're here.
Lovely. Oh, great. Perfect.
Okay. Well, until May, thank you so much for joining us, Felicity, and we'll see you soon.
Bye. I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Take care.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Just hold